Here we go. Chef AJ, thank you for talking with me today. I feel like I have whole food plant based royalty here with me. I've been following you and been a fan of yours for many years. Back, I would say, I think I first heard about you in 2010, 2011 when Forks Over Knives first came out. Um, and you've been doing great work and you have an awesome story and you have a new book coming out. So I want to dive into all of this juiciness and thank you so much for your time and for being here this morning.
Thank you for having me. I just want to tell you, I've watched several videos on your channel, and I really enjoyed the interview you did with Dr. Doug Lyle.
That's right. Yes, I did. I his book was such a game changer for me. It really his book is The Pleasure Trap. For anybody who hasn't read it, you should definitely go read that. And that it really changed the way that I thought about addiction. Really, and I haven't struggled with food addiction, but I've struggled with alcohol addiction, and cigarettes was a big one for me. And that book really helps me understand a lot of things. So yeah, that was great to talk with him. So can you tell, for anybody who doesn't know about you and your story and what you do, can you just start with a little introduction about yourself?
Sure. Okay, so my name's Chef AJ, and I have been vegan for almost 50 years now. It'll be 47 years on September 1st of this year, 2024. And I became vegan at the age of 17. I did that for ethical reasons. I was a freshman at the University of Pennsylvania, and I wanted to be a veterinarian, but I always joke instead I became a vegetarian. And the reason is because the very first day of my work study job, because I was on scholarship, so I had to work for a veterinarian, he wanted me to cut the heads off literally a whole tank of live salamanders. And I'm like, well, why? And he goes, well, I'm doing protein lens regeneration experiments in the amphibian, and all I need is their eye. And then there was a tank of frogs that were going to be next. And I'm like, even if I wasn't somebody that cared about animals, I was always a squeamish person. Like even today, if the doctor does a blood test, like I got to look the other way. So it's like this is not. Somebody tried to take me fishing once, and it's like I'm not doing this. I'm not gonna put a hook. It's the squeamish part. It's not the ethic part, right? But I was worried that I could lose my scholarship, so I did cut the head off of one salamander. It was a terrible experience. It bled. I literally threw up. I was so ashamed of myself. I was nauseous. I went to the student health center and I said, that's it. I'm vegan. I didn't have a word for vegan back then because if it was coined, I didn't know it, but it was like, I basically said to God, I said, look, okay, I'm sorry. I'm never going to eat, wear, or harm, knowingly another one of your creatures again. And so that was a great thing to do for ethics. But unfortunately, we didn't have the internet in 1977 or Dr. Neil Barnard or PCRM, and I did everything wrong. I was literally a junk food vegan. So all I did was remove animal products from my diet, but I didn't put anything healthy in like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds. So all I ate was junk food. Potato chips are vegan, Dr. Pepper's vegan, Coke Slurpee's vegan. And so, basically I became obese. And by obese, it was obese because at 5'6", I was almost 200 pounds. And I didn't realize back then about food addiction or the pleasure trap, but that I didn't eat any fruits and vegetables, which it's bad enough what I was eating in terms of just the food addiction and the weight aspect, but I didn't even realize, like, if you don't eat fiber, that is a bad decision because I ended up with I didn't end up with full blown colon cancer, but I ended up with what they actually said you have pre colon cancer. And the reason they said that is because in 2003, I was 43 years old. I had already been a vegan for 26 years, but I was a junk food vegan. And I woke up on January 1st of that year and I was bleeding profusely. And at the time I had an HMO. Now they probably would have, taken it more seriously because so many relatives of mine had colon cancer and some even died from it. But if they did a sigmoidoscopy, which is what Dr. McDougall always recommended. They didn't even do a full blown colonoscopy, but even only going up a little bit, they said my colon was riddled with edematous polyps that always turn to cancer if not removed. And they said, your colon is so dirty, even though I did that horrible prep, because basically I hadn't pooped for 43 years because I hadn't eaten any fiber, they couldn't remove them with the way they normally do. They said, well, we're going to have to do surgery, like abdominal surgery to take them out. And I'm like, oh, no, thank you. Because luckily, when I was 19, I had one of these same day operations. It was supposed to be a minor surgery. It turned out I was allergic to the general anesthetic, almost died, ended up in the hospital for months, and I've maintained this unnatural phobia of anesthesia. So I said, well, okay, what am I going to do? I need some time. I got to think about this. And I didn't know anything about how food is medicine. I didn't know any of this, right? Back then, I was 17 years old. I didn't even think I knew about Dr. McDougall back then. And so I had this magazine that I picked up, I kind of stole it. Like, back in the day when, doctors' offices got so smart now that they have this little QR code when you're in the waiting room so you can read the magazine on your phone, because people like me were always taking magazines or tearing out the people puzzle or tearing out the recipe. But I picked up this magazine because I thought it was so interesting. It was about discounted spas. And I had always wanted to go to a spa, but it's like, they're really expensive. And in this magazine, they had a place called the Optimum Health Institute near San Diego. And the thing is it was like about $800 a week, like about $100 a day. And I'm like, oh, I can afford that. It's beautiful San Diego. The weather's going to be great. So I signed up, really not knowing exactly what it was, which was good, because I think sometimes when you know too much, you get afraid. But it was a wonderful experience. Now, if I had heard of Dr. Lyle or Dr. Goldhammer back then, I might have ended up going to True North. But this was a wonderful place. They have also a branch in Austin. And it's a cool place because they get the diet. Like, it's a little bit more austere than what I eat now, because they're basically kind of detoxing and doing a cleanse. But it's the first time that I ever remember meeting people, especially people that were doctors or nurses, that said, hey, what you eat actually has a profound effect, not only in how you look and feel, which is important to a lot of people, but what diseases you can get and what diseases you can reverse. And nobody ever told me that. I came from a very sick and fat family that had every disease, from diabetes to cancer, you name it. They all died younger than probably they would have, and also sicker than they would have. And, we were just taught that this was our genetics. And of course, genetics is important, but it loads the gun. It's the diet and lifestyle that pulls the trigger. And, I always felt, well, I'm fat because my mom was fat, and my grandma was fat, and her great-grandma and her mother was fat, my great-grandmother, and, she lost her legs to diabetes. And I just figured it was my lot in life. This is my set point. It's, it's genetic. And it was just mind-blowing, not only to hear that, but to meet people, because every Friday they would bring in graduates that said, oh, I did this program and I had brain cancer, I had lupus, I had Lyme's disease, I had AIDS, whatever it was. And it was like they were well from the food. And I'm thinking, well, these diseases are way more serious, because mine is in the not even stage 1 yet. And I said, well, I'll just do what they say. It wasn't just the food. Of course, the food was a big component. They believed in a spiritual component, so I did some visualizations, and there were other things that they taught us. But I'll tell you, it also was raw. So I don't know if you necessarily have to be raw to heal, but I think what happens, and the reason people have so much success, whether it's a raw food diet or even a keto diet, is when you remove junk food, when you remove and carbohydrates are great, potatoes, rice, beans, I'm all for them. But sugar, flour, alcohol, those are carbohydrates too. They're refined carbohydrates. Those are not health promoting, and they're not weight loss promoting either. And so simply by removing those, I think a lot of people just get well. And so I did it their way for 2 years, which was raw. And I found raw, I have friends now that are like 100% raw. They do it all year round. It's like, God bless them. It's like, it was really hard, because I love my potatoes and I love my rice, but it was a healing diet for me. And within 6 months, and I hadn't even lost weight, because I wasn't even doing this for weight loss. I just didn't want to have colon cancer, and I really just didn't want to have surgery. I went back. I had another sigmoidoscopy. It was the same gastroenterologist doing it. And when he scoped me this time, he said, where are all your polyps? And I'm like, I don't know. He goes, well, where did you have the surgery done? And I'm like, I didn't have surgery. He goes, then how do you explain that all your polyps are gone? And I'm like, I don't know. I just changed my diet. And he said, well, that's impossible. And he storms out of the room, because he had photographs, because the first time they took photographs to know where they were for if they were going to go back. And there was an assisting, either GI doctor or nurse, who happened to be of Indian descent. And when he left the room, she whispered to me, I believe you, And I'm like, And that's when everything started. That's when I became Chef AJ. I'm AJ anyway, but I had actually gone to culinary school at that moment. Not because I wanted to be a chef, but because I knew that if I was going to eat healthfully was going to have to taste better than what they served us at OHI. It was basically this seed cheese that was made out of sesame seeds. Actually, now their food would probably actually taste good to me because I've neuro adapted. But you know, when you're stuck in the pleasure trap and having Coke Slurpees for breakfast and Dr. Peppers for lunch and eating dessert all day, candy cake, cookies, pies, and ice cream, although they were vegan, you know, and somebody offers you a salad or even a piece of watermelon, you're like, you got to be kidding me. But at the time, I needed more tools, and I thought, well, if I go to culinary school, and I went to raw culinary school, the food has got to taste better, and so that's kind of what happened.
Ah, so that was one of my questions, as far as why and how you became a chef.
That's
So
exactly, wow.
cool.
And I became AJ because so my name is Abby. And the thing is I never liked it because when I was young, I was overweight. I was obese from the age of 5. So guess what my nickname was in school? Flabby Abby. So I never liked it. And I never legally changed my name, but when I became a healthier eater. So after I got home from the Optimum Health Institute, I'm thinking like, well, I gotta like figure out what to have for breakfast instead of a Coke Slurpee with 8 pumps of vanilla syrup. And so I was working a full-time job as an activity director then. I wasn't a chef yet. I wasn't really making my own food very much. And so I would go to Jamba Juice. It's a smoothie place, which was like literally across the street from my house and my job because they were very close together because I lived where I lived because I needed to live by a 7-Eleven because I was such an addict to caffeine and sugar that I couldn't function without it, and I couldn't even drive sometimes to get to the 7-Eleven. I had to be able to walk to 7-Eleven. So I started going to Jamba Juice, and they have like 10 blenders going at once, and so you got to tell them your name like it's Starbucks, and they can't even hear you. And I'm like, Abby, and like, what? And I'm like, AJ. And so, they could seem to remember that. And then I got a little necklace with it. And also with the activity director job that I had, it just seemed so hard for people to remember my name, Abby. So if I wore AJ, so I became AJ. And that was kind of cool because when I got my first chef job, I don't know if it's changed, but over 20 years ago, there seemed to be, at least in some restaurants in LA, a preference for having male chefs than female chefs. And so I applied online, Chef AJ, and I got there and they said, oh, you're female. And I don't think they could say that today. I go, yeah. They go, okay. But I did a day of baking. You do work for free for a day, and they liked me and they hired me. So that's how I became Chef AJ. And anyway.
Oh, thank you for sharing that story. I had no idea. Very, very interesting. So at that point then, after you were eating raw, your polyps disappeared. So at that point, you're on this new path, and I imagine that you were I imagine that would be really surprising because this is information that you had no idea, right? You didn't know that food could help you feel better and even reverse
and look
things in
better
the body.
too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, I know I'm 20 years older now, but when I look at some of the pictures, like my skin, also I used to be in the sun a lot, which doesn't really help. But even I just think all that sugar, I think it ages you. I think it wrinkles you more than regular food.
Yeah. Well, all those antioxidants, because like you said, I mean, when you went vegan, you took stuff out, but you weren't adding stuff in.
Oh, no.
So at this point, then it's been like this evolution of, okay, so now you're going to add in a bunch of healthy stuff in. So what was sort of the next part of your journey after the raw portion?
So the next part, let's see, so we're 2003, so we're about a little over 20 years ago. Yeah, so thank you. It's nice. It's a nice walk down memory lane. So 2008, I happened to see a video of the most lovely man. You talk about plant-based royalty, Dr. Caldwell B. Esselstyn Jr., giving a lecture on preventing and reverse heart disease. And I was watching this. I ended up meeting him in person. I had never seen him before. And I immediately liked him. I thought he was just such a class act, and I believed what he was saying. And the lecture was about becoming bulletproof against heart disease. Now, because I was vegan, even unhealthy vegan, I didn't have heart disease like everyone else in my family. As a matter of fact, I had normal or low cholesterol because I wasn't eating animal products so long. And he talked about becoming bulletproof against heart disease, and he talked about omitting oil and also sugar and salt. And it just kind of made sense to me, like not because I thought to myself, well, everybody in my family, my father had open heart surgery and my grandfather, and everybody's on these medications. I said, well, why wouldn't I want to do that? And so on August 1st, 2008, I decided to become SOS free, or as SOS free as possible. Now I realize, I wasn't perfect, but I was pretty perfect, I think, with the oil, at least in terms of at home, not cooking with it. And it was just amazing because people don't realize that you don't need oil to cook and you don't need oil to live. I'm not against people eating fats like nuts and seeds and avocado, but it's so weird to me that people are so in love with their oil. But I get it in terms of calorie density, more dopamine is released. And so I started doing that. But what was weird, and my health definitely improved, but what was weird is I was still fat. And I'm thinking to myself, everybody else that's like SOS free, they're kind of lean. What's wrong with me? And so I ended up going to the True North Health Center in January of 2011. And so this is 4 years after not using oil, sugar, and salt. But what I didn't understand, and this is why I loved your interview with Dr. Lyle, is I never heard of calorie density. I knew about counting calories, which I don't think works and is unsustainable. But when I went to the True North Health Center, both Dr. Goldhammer and Dr. Lyle, they teach it, they lecture there. And I know calorie density had been around because Dr. McDougall had written a book called The McDougall Program for Maximum Weight Loss based on it, which unfortunately I bought, never read. And Dr. Dean Ornish had written a similar book on calorie density even earlier called Eat More, Weigh Less, which explains the principles of calorie density. And I realized that even though I was eating things that might be completely SOS free, like salt-free Ezekiel bread with almond butter on it, these are healthy foods, but they're not weight loss promoting. And so once I understood calorie density, because this wasn't just, because oil's 4,000 calories a pound, but nuts are 3,200. They're almost as calorically dense. So once I understood that, for the first time, I was actually able to lose weight. And it's been not forever, but it's been since that time. I haven't struggled with my weight. And calorie density was a game changer for me.
Can you, for anybody who doesn't know, and I would love to hear it from you, can you explain a little bit more about calorie density?
Yeah, absolutely, because this is what I've been doing for such a long time, and sometimes I get asked to lecture on it. So people probably know what counting calories are, and so maybe they'll have a little book or they'll memorize, okay, a cup of blueberries has this many calories, a half a cup of rice has this many calories. Well, if you do that, you basically have to memorize or know every single food. But with calorie density, you only have to know or understand or look at a chart what's known as the average calorie density of a few major food groups. And if you're vegan, there's a few you don't have to know. You don't have to know the calorie density of cheese or milk or eggs or meat if you're not going to eat those, for example. So there's a lady named Dr. Barbara Rolls who's a researcher at Penn State University, and she has done more research in this field than anyone else. And it was actually her book that I found. It's so funny how the universe conspires to help you. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. So I was at a bookstore one night, Friday night after a movie in Burbank, and we went to this dollar bookstore. I don't think it exists, but boy, it was the best bookstore. And she had this book called Volumetrics. And the reason it was so important to me is sometimes just hearing things doesn't help me learn as much as when I see pictures. That's why I love PowerPoint presentations more than lectures, because when I look at the slide, it's like, oh, so she had pictures in her book comparing foods. Like, for example, she said, for the same amount of calories as 1 cup of grapes, you could have, I think it was like 1/8 of a cup of raisins, or maybe it was 1/4 of a cup. What was going to fill you up more. And she had pictures, and like she showed like 1/8 of a cheeseburger, or a pizza, this little tiny couple of bites, or the kind of foods that we eat, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. And it really started making sense to me when I could see it visually. And so food ranges in calorie density, also known as energy density, from about 100 calories per pound on the low end to 4,000 calories per pound on the high end, which means there's a 40-fold difference in the calorie density of food. And when you understand the principles of calorie density and actually execute them in your eating, you could, if you wanted, eat twice as much food but take in half as many calories. And another one of the concepts that Dr. Rolls explained to people, because she actually has people in her lab that she's studying, is that the average human eats about 3 to 5 pounds of food per day in order to feel full and satisfied. And most weight loss programs are trying to get you to eat less food. And that is a disaster, because when you eat less food than your body desires, you get more hungry and you fall off your plan and you overeat, you binge, and often gain the weight back and then some. And so if you just simply tweak the average calorie density of your diet, I mean, do it by as little as 500 calories per pound, it's pretty easy to sustainably, deliciously, without going hungry, lose weight. And so if you I only remember the foods that I eat. So, for example, vegetables are about 100 calories per pound. It is impossible to overeat on raw vegetables. It really is. Because if, let's say, you weigh 150 pounds and you need at least 10 calories per pound of body weight because you're not really moving around. You probably need more, even if you're, exercising just a little bit, just going to your job. But let's just say you only need 1,500 calories a day to maintain your weight. Are you really going to be able to eat 15 pounds of raw vegetables? I don't think so. When you cook the vegetables, you increase the calorie density slightly to about 200 because now you have water, and water adds weight without calories. But can you eat 7 pounds of cooked vegetables a day? I don't think so. You move up a little bit, you have fruit, which is 200 to 300 calories per pound. Can you eat 5 pounds of fruit a day? I mean, a fruitarian can, but I don't know. I've eaten an entire cantaloupe that's weighed like a pound, and it's like I'm pretty full from the water and fiber. And then you have other foods like starches, like potatoes and sweet potatoes, which are about 375 calories per pound. Whole grains that are about 500 calories per pound if they're cooked in water. And I have to say that because, see, water adds weight and volume without calories. So people that just eat raw oats with a splash of almond milk, it's healthy, but now that's 1,800 calories per pound. Cook those same oats in water, it's about 365 calories per pound, and the water will help you with satiety. So then we have beans, whole grains at 500 calories per pound, oats, quinoa, teff, millet, amaranth, all the whole grains, corn is a whole grain, and bees, split peas, lentils, all the legumes are about 550 to 600. And so if you keep the average calorie density of your food to about that, doesn't mean, see, this is where my work has, I don't want to say misled, but people got confused. I wasn't telling people that they could only eat to the left of the red line. I drew this red line after legumes. But I was saying that all the food to the left of the red line, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes, you don't have to weigh and measure. You don't have to worry about that. And the reason is those foods, which are whole plant foods found in nature, contain two very important components that not only help you lose weight, but help you be healthy: water and fiber. Fiber is important to every bodily process. It helps flush out toxins. It binds to cholesterol. But where weight loss is concerned and satiety is concerned, when you have fiber and water in the same package, you create what's known as bulk. Like if you took a dry sponge, put it in water, now it expands, and water and fiber contain bulk, and bulk creates satiety. So think about what I was eating before. Nothing. I had no fiber, zero. So of course I'm going to have excess weight and colon polyps, right? And so those are the foods, if people concentrate on, they will be very healthy and probably find a good weight for them. Now, what about the foods, I call to the right of the red line? Now, some of them are not healthy. They're just calorically dense. So we'll take the first food, which is avocado. That's about 750 calories per pound. It's a good fat, but a lot of people can't moderate that. So, for example, the California Avocado Commission says a serving of avocado is a fifth. To some people, it's the whole avocado. So it's healthy. It's 300 calories, but that's a lot of fat. And Dr. McDougall said the fat you eat is the fat you wear. So if you can have it more as a condiment, there's nothing wrong or unhealthy about it. But other things to the right of the red line are not so healthy, in my opinion. Animal products starting at about 1,000 calories per pound, moving up. Dairy and cheese about 1,600 calories per pound. Flour about 1,500 calories per pound in bread. Sugar 1,800 calories. Oil 4,000 calories. So, I think about sugar, flour, and oil is kind of the same thing because there's no fiber, there's no water. And when there's no fiber or water, you don't get full. You're going to overeat. And then we have the whole plant fats like nuts and seeds. They're perfectly healthy. They're about 2,600 to 3,200 calories per pound. But a lot of people can't moderate the use of them because they're so delicious. And the way they are found now is not the way our ancestors ate them in nature. We go to Costco and we can get 3-pound bags of roasted, salted, every kind of nut, right? And we can just eat them hand to mouth watching TV. Our ancestors, I think I actually have it. This is what a nut looks like in nature,
What
See
kind of
how
nut
hard-
is that? I don't even know.
This is a walnut, and this thing is, I
Ah.
got it from Dr. Howard Jacobson when I visited him in North Carolina, and this is after the other layer was taken off. So first there was like this whole dirt layer. It was the size of a softball, but I didn't, want to travel with that. I mean, I cannot open this. I have dropped this from a roof. I don't know how our ancestors ate an ounce of nuts or seeds a day when most people can't even open them with tools. So what I'm saying is these aren't unhealthy at all, but they are calorically dense. And if you're struggling with your weight, the foods that you're having a problem with, you might want to, for some people that are very strong with addictive properties towards certain foods, eliminate them entirely, or reduce them, or just do an experiment and eliminate them for 3 weeks and see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, if we had to work that hard for walnuts, we wouldn't eat as many, that's for sure. Or any nuts, right?
Or think about coconut oil. How did our ancestors eat coconut oil? I went to culinary school. I learned how to open a coconut. It is one of the hardest things you'll ever do.
It's true. You need a very sharp machete.
Oh my God! It's even with that, you need a lot of strength.
Yeah.
And so how are our ancestors eating coconut oil? They couldn't, or olive oil. They couldn't make it.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, I like how you explain that. I think that's really well. It's easy to understand, and it makes a lot of sense. So then you got on this path. What changed for you then? Because you were doing the SOS free, right? And you're like, okay, well, I'm not losing any weight. What's going on? So then you dropped.
Got rid of bread and nuts.
Bread and nuts.
Mm-hmm. I'm telling you, it was so profound, the difference, and it was so quick. And then I could actually eat more food of things like rice and sweet potatoes and potatoes, things I really love, rather than having small amounts of these more, in my opinion, hyper palatable foods. And it's been great. And I tried to reintroduce them with the help of Dr. Doug Lisle. And I can't eat bread. I don't eat it a lot because it's not that I think there's anything wrong with it, but I look at it like, but there's other things I could eat that's healthier. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I don't have a judgment on bread. There's this new bread now called pacha bread. That's like, it's a little bit of small bread. It's buckwheat, water, and salt. Mm-hmm. And when I'm having soup, I'll have it. But it's a bread that's harder to get to because it always has to be in the freezer. You got to, so I can't impulsively just take like it's not like having a loaf of sourdough where I eat the whole thing because it's so delicious. So I can do that, and I can have avocado if I want it. But I've tried with nuts, and let me tell you, I don't know what it is, but they're just they're my Achilles heel because they're so good.
Yeah, I think you bring up so many good points. And side note, I've been making the buckwheat salt and water bread for a while right now, and I actually have some that's rising right now. I'm going to put it in the oven right when we get off, but it's not as delicious. Right, it's just not as tasty, and so it's easier to not to overeat it.
Exactly, it's not like eating Dave's Killer Bread or Ezekiel's cinnamon raisin bread, with peanut butter or almond butter. It's a nice little treat once in a while, or not even a treat. I mean, I can have it as much as I want, but like I said, if I forget to defrost it, it's like, okay, well, I want it now. I don't have the time to wait. But yeah, it's fun. That's kind of fun. Yeah, I found that salt wasn't a big deal for me. I didn't eat it strictly for years, but as I get older, I just don't want to always have to order online to get the strictly salt-free condiments. So I don't cook with it because I feel like you don't need it, and people should be able to add as much as they want, not as much as I feel is correct. So salt's not a problem too much for me. And truthfully, I know this is going to sound weird, and again, I learned, that's why I loved your interview with Dr. Lisle, because I always learn something when I listen to him. I always said I was a sugar addict, but I don't think it was true. I was a sugar fat addict because I wasn't eating Twizzlers, gummy bears, Sour Patch Kids. It was some kind of rich dessert with sugar and fat. And I find for me, personally, once I take out the high fat aspect of the diet, sugar, not that I seek to eat sugar by itself, but it doesn't have that same like draw or I can't, it's not like I can't stop eating it. I don't eat Jolly Ranchers, but I have a feeling I could if I wanted to. They don't light up those circuits in my brain when it's just sugar alone.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. It's that combination that really gets your dopamine rush going.
It doesn't exist in nature, that combination. Think about it. Name a food, you could say avocados and nuts have fat and fruit has sugar. Name a food that has sugar and fat together. You'd be hard pressed to think of one.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I don't eat a lot of bread. I have a condition called perioral dermatitis that it took me a year to figure out what it was. And it basically, it looked like I had really bad acne. but it was really painful and itchy, and I always had good skin, and it I was hospitalized during a trip to Malaysia, and I was really really sick. Nobody really knew what was wrong with me. They thought I had dengue fever. They kept me overnight. They hooked me up. They ran all these tests. They never did figure out what was wrong. They put me on a bunch of antibiotics and a bunch of other medicine. And after that, my skin started breaking out. And I was like, that's weird. I don't get breakouts. And it got worse and worse and worse. And it was painful and terrible. And it took me a year to figure it out because I was eating really healthy. I was eating, the whole food plant-based and oil-free. And I quit drinking in 2015. I quit smoking in 2015. I was exercising. I live a healthy lifestyle. I'm like, what's going on? But eventually I found out that it was something called perioral dermatitis. And I had to change some things. I had to stop eating cinnamon, of all things. Cinnamon is a trigger for it. But a big one was gluten. And I was like, no, because I loved sourdough bread, and I loved, a big piece of Ezekiel toasted bread with almond butter was like, what could be better? And the funny thing is, I was really nervous about, not eating bread, because I figured any gluten-free bread isn't even worth eating because most of it's just not good. And
Right.
so I was really nervous. But what happened was it wasn't that hard, and I don't really miss it. So if I do have a bread, it's going to be something like that buckwheat bread. I'm not going to overdo it because it's not as good as sourdough bread. But I just started eating other things that were healthier. I'd put stuff on a bed of rice, or, a bunch of greens. And and so I'm kind of circling back to what you said. When you add, when you eat those more calorie dense things, you miss an opportunity to eat the really, really health promoting stuff that's going to satiate and add bulk, and also help us poop really well as well,
I know.
right? So
It's important. It's interesting when you said it wasn't that hard for you to give up bread, because I imagine your frame of reference now, having given up two things that the majority of people that smoke and drink cannot do, you gave them both up. And that must have been, I'm guessing, hard, at least at the beginning. And so you have a new definition of what is hard.
yeah, that wasn't easy for sure.
Which was harder? Because I used to smoke, I'm embarrassed to say. And I was never able to quit smoking until I busted my ribs. And I was so lucky that I was in this accident, because this was in 1985. And I don't want to say I only smoked for 5 years, because no amount of smoking is healthy. And it was only a pack a day, again, justifying it. It was through my anorexic college years. But when I broke my rib in 1985, back then the doctors did something they don't do now, and they tape you. And so they tape you like, oh my God, you can't even take the slightest breath to breathe on your own. And so trying to inhale a cigarette, I couldn't do it. And so after the 6 weeks, I'm like, well, I guess I don't smoke anymore. Because every time I tried to quit on my own, it was hard. So I'm curious, what was harder because I never drank alcohol, so I can't speak to how hard that is. But what was harder for you, cigarettes or alcohol? And did you do them at the same time?
Yeah, I did them at the same time, because I was like, well, if it's gonna suck, it's gonna just really really suck, and I don't want to space out the suck. Like, let's just do it all now. But and that's how my brain works. I'm very all or nothing. I have an addict brain. Like, that's just kind of how I'm wired. So I was like, well, it's either all or nothing. And so, and again, I've heard you talk in presentations. Moderation doesn't work well for some people. For some
Well,
people,
not
it
for an
can.
addict. But not if you're an addict,
But
though.
if you're an addict, no.
Who smokes one cigarette a day? Who drinks? I mean, there are. Yeah, I agree. Moderation has never. I've never met an addict for which moderation worked. And I know they talk about harm reduction in circles, and of course, it's better to reduce if you can't eliminate. But the thing is, I wish that people that had addictions, whatever it was, could experience the freedom from addiction. And I know how hard it is to quit. It was hard for me to quit sugar. It was July 6, 2003. And I remember the first week was hell. I was crying. I think it was harder for me emotionally than physically, because the physical detox is like a stomach flu. And most people have had a stomach flu. It's unpleasant if you're nauseous and have diarrhea, but that passes. It was the emotional detox, like, that was the hardest thing. But when you get to the other side, and this is the thing, you can tell me how you feel. You feel so much better without the addiction than you did with it. And that's what I wish for everyone that struggles, whether it's food or alcohol or cigarettes or hard drugs, if they can get to the point where they're clean enough to experience life without the substance, they might find peace and joy in a way that the substance didn't provide for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's a different, it's more joy and less pleasure, right? Because I think I will always miss the high of drinking. I'll always miss that first drag of a cigarette. Like for me, I've never found anything better than that. And so I'll always miss, but it's so momentary, and it's also so heightened that the down, the other side of that coin is so bad. Like you just feel so bad. But when I stopped, it was like I just felt, not great, not terrible, but pretty good, pretty much all the time. And so it's that consistency that it provided, where it wasn't those ups and downs, those highs and lows. And that was sort of the trade-off, right? Like, well, if I'm either going to feel really, really good in moments of my day and also have the payoff be poor health, right? Or if I can feel pretty good all the time in my life and be really healthy, like I want to choose that, because in the long term, that's, that was a no-brainer to me.
That's sustainable too, yeah.
Right.
But it's so hard for people, Molly, isn't it? I mean, I see people all the time that struggle with this, and my heart goes out to them because I've been in their shoes, and all we can do is provide information. And that's why it's so useful for people, I feel. I mean, I don't know if you went into like a rehab or whatever, but like even just going to True North, which to me is like prison in a way. I mean, in getting you away from your addictions, because people have gone there to quit drinking, to quit smoking, to quit caffeine, which Dr. Goldhammer says is one of the hardest, believe it or not, But I wish people could experience that, because there's just so much like peace and joy on the other side. Because when you have an addiction, your life is spent trying to scratch that itch. And so even though mine was only sugar, it's like I remember if I couldn't get my Coke Slurpee, like what a bitch I was, and I would yell at the guy, because sometimes I would go to 7-Eleven and like the machine was broken. But it couldn't be like a cherry Slurpee or a 7-Up Slurpee. It had to be Coke Slurpee, or they were out of vanilla syrup. And I would like a crazy person yell at the cashier and call I mean, like your addictions can make you insane, And like you say, I don't know about you with the drinking well, I know for smoking, most people have to smoke continually throughout the day. You don't just say, "Oh, I'm going to have this joy. I'm going to just enjoy this one cigarette and then I'm done." Well, the sugar was the same thing. So, I'd have my morning Dr. Pepper, but then a couple hours later, I'd have to walk back to 7-Eleven. That's why I chose where I was going to work and live. And then I'd have to get a 48-ounce Dr. Pepper Big Gulp. And a couple hours later, it's like, okay, you had to keep feeding the addiction like all day, every day, and that becomes a full-time job.
Yeah, you definitely cater to it, and it is a job. So the space that is freed up, just the mental space, and actually like logistically, you will save time, right? During your day. I think, it's and you say it's interesting because the thing is with food is like we have to eat. We don't have to drink. We don't have to smoke cigarettes to survive. Like you really do have to eat. So I think that in many ways that struggle is different than with alcohol or with drugs or with smoking. Absolutely. In many ways. Absolutely. I think because I do have an addict kind of wiring for a brain. And I got to the point where I'm like, I just accept that that's how my brain works. And that's just what it is, right? No judgment. That's just how it is. So I got to work with what I got. And with the food aspect, I remember in college, I've been a vegetarian my whole life, never eaten meat, was raised that way. But I was definitely, cheese, milk, eggs, all of that. And I remember I have this very clear memory in college. I rode my bike home for lunch and I made a box of like mac and cheese, and it was like Annie's or something, and I remember eating it and being full, but it was so good I just kept eating it, and I was so full but I just kept eating it, and it wasn't until I really started eating whole food plant-based that behavior could kind of stop. And I think that eating this way has allowed me to live a pretty regulated life, but I didn't realize it at the time. Right. But looking back, I see that. And I'm like, oh, I did have, it was that pleasure trap. It was that dopamine lighting up from that cheese. And when I really went whole food plant-based, that's when it just kind of like everything became a lot easier. Although I didn't really have a big struggle with food, but I can that memory is like, if I wouldn't have found this way of eating and if I didn't do this, I think my life would be a lot different, even if I would have quit drinking and smoking, right? Because there are other substances. There's always other substances.
Well, cheese, Dr. Barnard, who you did a wonderful interview with as well, talks about how cheese is very addictive.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's biological reasons for that. Um,
Absolutely.
I want to talk about nuts really quick because I know that for you, dropping nuts was a big game changer in
Yes.
your weight and, mainly your weight and probably how you felt as well. And I think, and you kind of hit on this before, for some people, it's like they can do a little bit of nuts here and there. And for
And
some
then
people, they just can't.
they're very healthy. I always tell people, do the least restrictive program that you can do that will give you the results you seek.
Hmm.
But I have people that are not willing to take them out for even an experiment of 3 weeks to see if it
Right.
makes a difference. And so if that's not addiction, they go, oh, well, Dr. So-and-so says we have to have them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, you still have fat on your body. So you're going to be okay during this 3 week experiment if you don't have nuts. Plus, you can get what you're eating nuts for, those omega-3 fatty acids, from seeds, from chia seeds, from flax seeds, which tend to be less triggering for most people,
Yeah.
from eating enough leafy greens. So, yeah, I find even in food addiction circles that are not plant-based, they say that there's some kind of, I believe that for some people, there's some kind of psychoactivity going on with nuts, especially when you roast them, salt them, and turn them into a nut butter. Because when you turn nuts into a nut butter, you not only now have increased the calorie density, but you've decreased the volume. So it's like, it's really hard to, I mean, peanut butter is like crack, if you ask me, honestly.
Yeah.
And I don't even want to do PB2 just because you took the fat out, because it still quacks like a duck and walks like a duck.
Hmm. Yeah, especially peanut butter with salt and sugar. Like that's just, I mean, you just want to take a spoon and keep eating it. It's,
And that's what they give the kids, right? Skippy, Peter
hmm.
Pan, Jif, oil, sugar, salt. And remember, we already talked about how there's no food in nature that has sugar and fat. Name a
Yeah.
food in nature that has sugar, oil, and salt. It doesn't exist. And Dr. Lyle always says we weren't meant to activate those pathways at the same time.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, you hit it. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about neuroadaptation? Because what we see in our community very often, people will come to us straight off the standard American diet boat, and they're like, okay, my doctor said I need to do something, and they'll make some whole food plant-based recipes, and it's like, okay, well, they're okay. It's not what I'm used to, but it's okay. But then time goes by, and then all of a sudden, it's like they're craving big salads, and they're really, enjoying the sauerkraut that they thought that they really didn't like. So can you talk a little bit about that and just what you've seen from your experience and your community and yourself?
Sure. Well, neuroadaptation is a fancy word for getting used to something. And I'll give two examples that other people might relate to in their lives. One is going to the movies. If you've ever gone to the movies late, the theater is already dark. And when you first enter, it's kind of hard to see. So instead of freaking out or calling the usher, if you just stand still for a few minutes, your eyes will adjust to the new level of darkness from the screen giving light, and you can go find a seat. Well, the same thing can happen with your taste buds. When I was born in 1960, and my parents used to feed us whole milk, even though I was allergic to milk, but that's another story. But at a certain point in time, my father, who was health conscious, heard that it's not good, and we're going to switch the kids to non-fat milk. And so, of course, we rebelled because non-fat milk compared to whole milk, it tastes very watery. It's not as rich. And we were like, well, this is disgusting. And the parents were like, take it or leave it. Well, after we got used to the non-fat milk, every now and then we'd go to a relative's house and they would serve us whole milk and it would be the opposite, like, ugh, this is like paint.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the same thing can happen with your taste buds. And the way that it can go faster is that I have mentioned True North. When people do a therapeutic, medically supervised water-only fast, their taste buds, even if it's only for a few days, their taste buds can become so sensitive that when we refeed them, because I used to work there for years, some of the first foods they have would be like water, like what they'll have some juice, but then when they get solid foods, depending on the patient, the first food could be some watermelon chunks or some steamed zucchini. And when I worked there, I would be the person to deliver the order of the first food. And I am telling you, I would swear I was watching the movie Harry Met Sally, and they would eat steamed zucchini, and I'm like, what? This is not a hot fudge sundae. And so your taste buds, if you've been assaulting, here's the other thing, because you used to smoke, I did too. when you smoke, you actually are burning your taste buds. So your taste buds are not very sensitive. And after you stop smoking, your taste buds regenerate. And now, food tastes a little different. Might taste a little better. Maybe I don't need as much salt. Well, the same thing happens when you stop eating animal products, sugar, fat, and salt in those kind of quantities. And then you can taste like, a piece of romaine lettuce you can taste like a subtle sweetness to it, a little bit of vanilla, for example. Zucchini, everything. That's the thing. This is the weirdest thing. I never thought I'd be this person because I was like the sugar addict, right? I remember one time my veterinarian, Dr. Lloyd Pilch, came to a housewarming party I had. And I used to have a lot of candy dishes because I was an apartment manager at the time. And they'd always gift us these, beautiful little crystal dishes. So all over my apartment, I had there were 7 dishes, and it had all this candy in it, like vegan candy, like Goldenberg peanut chews. And he said to me, he goes, "I've never seen anybody with as much candy." And I'm like, oh, I didn't think about it at the time, right? But even with all that stuff, when I got away from it, I just didn't desire it as much, Yeah. And now, if you give me a choice, this is hilarious. This is perfect timing for this interview. So yesterday I had a woman's luncheon with just 9 other girlfriends, and we made earrings, and it was a potluck. And so having a dessert book coming up, I made a bunch of desserts because I keep having to do these demonstrations. And one of the girls brought sushi, and sushi is my favorite food in the whole world. She bought these hand rolls. And so we ate lunch, and then we did our craft, and then it was time for dessert a couple hours later, and they were eating the peanut butter chocolate cheesecake, and I was like, oh, I just had more sushi. I'd rather have savory now than sweet. If you give me a choice of chips and salsa or cake, I want the savory. And I never thought I'd become that person, because when people say, "Oh, I don't like sweets," I'm like, you're lying. But it's not that I don't like them, and I eat them, but things can change, and neuroadaptation is possible, but only with a period of abstinence. This is where you can't do harm reduction, because with sugar, you can't really eat less sugar and expect to not crave it, or switch to monk fruit or stevia, or you kind of have to go with a period of discomfort without it. And then I tell you, your taste buds will wake up, and then you eat watermelon, you eat, things that are right now maybe disgusting to you, and you just love them.
Yeah. Yeah. So if anybody's listening to this and is like, I can't imagine I'll ever like salad, or I can't imagine never, or that there will be a day that I don't like a Coke Slurpee, for example, it is possible. But I think it's, for a lot of people, it's that initial discomfort that is really challenging. And on that same vein, you work with a lot of people, you've helped so many lives. Do you see often people will adopt this way of eating, and they'll do really well with it, and they'll get awesome results, and then they go back to how they used to eat? Do you see that often?
The recidivism is heartbreaking. That's why I kind of stopped coaching people individually, because you get so invested in them, especially if they're losing a lot of weight, like 100 pounds, and then they gain some or all of it back. Yeah. Food addiction is real. The pleasure trap is real. I think it is the hardest thing. I interviewed Dr. Ellen Goldhammer, the co-founder of the True North Health Center and the co-author of The Pleasure Trap, often, and he says, it's easier to beat stage 4 cancer. And you made a point about I don't think I could ever go through the discomfort. And what I want to assure people is you can. You're strong enough. And let me give an example. I've never had children, but I know a lot of people that have kids, and they have more than one. And I'm told that labor is the most painful thing you can experience in your body. And yet women go through that to have a beloved child, and then somehow they do it again. I know people that have done it 10 and 11 times. The period of detox does not last as long as you will think. And that's why going to a place, for me, I don't know if I could have given up sugar at home, but being in a safe environment like the Optimum Health Institute, like the True North Health Center, there's other places, but those were the 2 that I happened to go to. You can do it with support. And the thing is I think it's very hard to do if you have a job, if you're in your regular life, but if you can give yourself the gift of some time. And sometimes whatever the symptom is, maybe it's a headache or a stomach ache, it might last as little as 3 days. It's not forever. And you can do things to pamper yourself during that time, especially if you're at a place getting massages, it will, this too shall pass. It will. So I would hate to think that people won't try, because there is going to be discomfort. life is uncomfortable. I mean,
Yeah.
let's face it. So do you want the discomfort of the couple of days of detox, or do you want the discomfort that you have now from maybe having an addiction and possibly a lifestyle disease that goes along with it, and possibly excess weight that you say you don't want? Is that comfortable for you?
Yeah.
Think about it that way. If there's a saying, life is hard, choose your hard.
Yeah. It's true. Yeah, and it's interesting how it's like you have to reach the point where you're ready for a different kind of hard, because we get into patterns, we get into habits, and we can actually get used to hard. And then if it's changing that hard, that's what can be like, oh no, but I like this hard. I like my, because it's the pattern, it's the routine. And I think for a lot of people too, it is the physical discomfort, but it's also the emotional discomfort,
Mhm.
right? And that is a big one. And I think that it seems to me that a lot of people who are on this really healthy path and they're really kicking ass, it always seems like it's some kind of, life event that's really, really emotionally hard that then they will go dip into the behavior
Yeah.
that they used to do. So I think that there that's a whole nother thing to tackle as well. Like the food is one part, and then it's the emotional part.
So I'm not a psychologist, and I'm not an expert, but like you say, I've worked with enough people that I have two things that might be useful. First of all, if hunger's not the problem, food's not the solution. So if you have past trauma, if you have, there's no shame in getting therapy. I see
Yeah.
like four people, not all at the same time. So there's no shame in there, because if you're eating or drinking or medicating with any substance, in order to not feel a feeling, or to you need to work on that somehow, and there's, people say I can't afford therapy. Well, in every major city there are medical centers with sliding scales. There are people, like, I remember when I couldn't afford therapy, I lived near UCLA, and when people get their PhD or their MD, in the case of a psychiatrist, it's free, because they need to practice on people. So if there's always a way to get help, if within your budget. So that would be one thing I would say. But one thing I've noticed with some people is that when something happens in their life that's very emotionally charged, and I'll give the example that I hear a lot, because I've seen this when I was working with private clients. Okay, so my mom has Alzheimer's and I'm her caregiver now, and so because of that I ate junk food. Okay, you have to examine that. Is that true?
Mm-hmm.
Is that really true? Or is the reason you succumb to the pleasure trap because now your mom, caring for her, is taking up so much of your time, having to visit her, having to take care of all your needs, that you are no longer exercising, you're no longer batch cooking, and that there is zero healthy food in your house to eat. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to work with people's thoughts, because sometimes what they think it is, it isn't. Their systems for success are no longer in place when their life becomes stressful or time challenged. So it's really easy for people to say, oh, this emotional switch flipped because, did it? Or because you weren't doing what you were doing to be successful? That's what I would have people examine.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And making sure your system is set up for success, because
That's the secret. I'm
yeah,
not that special, honestly, but I have systems in place,
yeah,
like batch cooking, so that there's just no way to succumb to temptation, because there's nothing bad in the house, and I'm always replenishing the good.
that's
And when
right.
I travel, like I'm getting ready to go to Mexico for a job for 8 weeks, I leave nothing to chance. I mean, I dehydrated like probably a month's worth of granola, because it's basically made out of oats and fruit, because I am never going to go anywhere hungry. I want to make sure there's always something I can eat.
Yep. Amen to that. I mean, preparation is so, so key, and taking care of your future self. I always say, do the things now so your future self is taken care of. And then you can really weather any storm, right? And it's, I'm coming off from a very, very difficult year. And if I didn't have these systems in place, like I would have, that would have just wiped me out. But I had it set up. I know what I'm doing. Okay, I'm going to make sure my future self is okay. So that's so, so important. So preparation is so good.
Well, there's a saying, you might have heard of it: preparation trumps motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And so when people say, well, I don't feel like eating the healthy food, well, guess what? Let's say you're somebody that works at home like me, and then literally there's nothing in your house but healthy food. What are you going to do?
Right.
So trumps motivation.
That's right.
You know?
And if for anybody who's read The Pleasure Trap will know why that actually works, because we're trying to find, we're trying to conserve energy. So if we have to cook a meal from scratch to be fed, or just put something, heat something up that you've already made, then we're going to choose the thing that's easier.
I think anybody that struggles with addiction of any kind, that would be a must read for them.
Yep, agreed. Okay, couple quick questions. I want to know your thoughts on intermittent fasting. So I know that this is a big one for people. People are doing this a lot. I'm curious to know your thoughts.
I think you should do it if it works for you, but not because you're trying to restrict. So, in other words, I technically intermittent fast because I genuinely don't get hungry until noon. And, I've had people say, well, that's because, you're eating dinner. Because there's some intermittent fasting people that say just don't eat dinner, eat breakfast and lunch. But even when I was at the True North Health Center as a patient and fasted, you would think when I was coming off the fast, I'd be hungry in the morning. No, my body doesn't get hungry till noon. I don't know what to tell you. So I feel like if you're genuinely hungry in the morning, you should eat. I don't think you should. I think what you shouldn't do, unless you're a night shift worker, is not eat after dinner. That is the biggest thing to me, is people that eat a dinner. And this is why, if you're familiar with Dr. Lyle, he has that lecture on the cram circuit, how people eat a full dinner and then keep eating and eating and eating. It's called the conditioned cram. So I think everybody should intermittent fast for 12 hours. Stop eating at 7 and don't eat again till 7. But some people are able to extend that window. Don't extend it at night by eating later. But some people just genuinely, my husband is hungry the minute he wakes up. He should eat. And I'm sure that there's benefits for longevity and maybe even for weight loss. But if somebody has to white knuckle it, if they wake up at 6 and they're hungry at 9 and they got to sit there like waiting till 12 to eat, I don't think that's healthy, because I feel that no one could have ever gotten overweight or obese unless they ate outside the demands of true hunger. And true hunger can be found when you're not eating hyperpalatable food, because you're never going to be satisfied eating sugar, flour, oil, alcohol, those foods, but you can be satisfied eating fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. So I feel like if it works for the person, they should do it, but they shouldn't do it if it's causing them stress or discomfort, or causing, especially people with history of anorexia, that's just another form of restriction. So,
Yeah, that's a great point. And depending on people's reasons for doing it, they might not have to do it if bus stop number one is like whole plant foods, eliminating all of the processed stuff, eliminating the oil and everything else. It could be that is what's going to work for someone, and then maybe that as an option if it works for their body. It's kind of what I'm hearing
like
you say.
if somebody's still eating unhealthily, well, I guess eating less unhealthily is going to be better for
Right.
you.
Yes.
But if somebody eating a very healthy diet, do it if it works for you. But don't make it be your religion. Like, oh, I gotta,
Yeah.
not breakfast, or but don't eat after dinner. This is what I see, is most people don't struggle so much in the morning and overeating and binging. It's what happens after dinner. They had a day, their job is stressful, their kids are screaming, the dog goes to the bathroom in the house, and it's like they're sitting on the couch after dinner, like watching the TV with the commercials that are driving them. And those are the calories you want to intermittent fast of, is after dinner.
Right. Yeah, great point. And because with breakfast, we've just had a natural fast while we're sleeping, so we're not, on that roller coaster, that high of whatever we had eaten throughout the day either, right? Like we've had that break. So, okay, so you have a book coming out, a new book called Sweet Indulgence. And
Right.
I would love to hear about it. It's a beautiful photography, by the way. The cover is gorgeous.
Thank you. It's a wonderful vegan cookbook author named Hannah Kaminsky. She took a picture of every single recipe. There's 156 of them, and I'm just so proud of this book. And her work is just stunning. You just want to eat it right off the page. Yeah, it comes out August 27th.
Awesome. So, okay, 150 recipes. Tell me, because we've been talking about sugar a lot, right? And so for a lot of people, they might think, oh, yay, I can eat dessert. I can eat desserts and still eat healthy, and still be trim and feeling good. So what kind of sugar do you use in this in your desserts? I would love to know.
Thank you. So the subtitle of the book, it's called Chef AJ's Sweet Indulgence, Guilt-Free Treats Sweetened Naturally with Fruit. So I use the fruit, the whole fruit, and nothing but the whole fruit. And sometimes it comes from dates, which are a dried fruit. And sometimes it comes from other things like bananas or apples or strawberries. I'm trying to think, applesauce, for example. So it's just fruit. Sometimes it's dried fruit, but there's no refined sugar. There's no honey, agave, maple syrup, stevia, monk fruit, erythritol, xylitol, mannitol, coconut syrup, all that kind of stuff. So it's really just fruit.
Okay. So how do they taste? I mean, they have to taste, to you, they taste amazing. To somebody who's eating, cake from the grocery store, they might not taste amazing yet, but
Well, not all of them will taste amazing to that person or
Yeah.
to my former self. But what we did is to help people out, we created this little chart in the book that will tell you, and I'm going to show it to you right here. This could help. This little chart right here will tell you the level of sweetness. One strawberry is subtly sweet. If you're a sad eater or a junk food vegan, don't eat those. The two strawberries.
don't
nice
eat those. I like it.
Don't eat those first. The two strawberries with nice and sweet might satisfy you, but the ones that say superbly sweet with 3 strawberries, those are absolutely going to satisfy you. And those are going to be recipes like the decadent chocolate mousse, the peanut butter chocolate cheesecake, the German chocolate cake. Similarly, what we did is we created a grid for the fat content. So the low fat and subtly sweet, those are the way I eat. Those might not satisfy you right now. But when we start adding more fat, we call it semi-decadent. And the ones that are higher in fat, like that have a lot of peanut butter and chocolate, those are rich and decadent. But the reason I say that a lot of these recipes, like the peanut butter chocolate cheesecake, will be fine for everyone, because when I worked as a pastry chef in Los Angeles, we served these to regular people. They happened to be vegan and they happened to be free of refined sugar, but everybody loved them. So I'm very confident that at least 25% of the recipes will fall under that category.
Oh,
Maybe
that's
more.
awesome. Well, I can't wait to try some of those delicious recipes. And yeah, it's incredible that you can have such tasty, tasty treats and have it be just with, whole plant foods. I think that's so cool. We do use in our recipes, sometimes we'll use some maple syrup or some coconut sugar. Sometimes we'll also use applesauce and, dates and stuff like that. So for the person who, because there's people who can eat a little bit of maple syrup and coconut sugar and that kind of stuff. And then there's people who that will be really triggering for them. Right.
Know thyself. So I don't know if I can eat coconut or maple, because what I do is I always use date syrup. That's what I use. So when I got out of the Optimum Health Institute, and that would have been July 13th now, 2003, and committed to not having sugar, I committed to all sugar. And so one of the reasons I like using dates is because I can make date syrup in my own kitchen. I don't anymore, because now there's wonderful organic brands that are affordable and available with free delivery on Amazon and at Walmart. But back in the day, in my very first cookbook, I had a recipe for it, because I feel that it's a little bit healthier than the other sugars, because, as we talked before, it's a whole food with the water, fiber, vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, antioxidants, and micronutrients intact. So I can't make coconut sugar or maple syrup in my own kitchen. And by the way, maple syrup, as delicious as it is, it's pretty costly. I feel like date syrup is a more affordable option. And, it takes, I think, 40 gallons of maple sap tapped from a tree to make 1 gallon. So, I feel like the best sweetener is the one you're going to use the least of. But date syrup, to me, tastes amazing. Now, it's not quite as sweet as maple syrup, but it's really got a wonderful, like caramely, just delicious taste that I think lends itself really well to recipes. And so instead of coconut sugar, not that somebody has to, you could use date sugar. So it is possible to use dates for everything if you wanted to.
Yeah. Awesome. The first time I made date syrup, I was so proud of myself, and I was like, oh, this is like, it was really empowering for me to do that. And I think this whole way of eating is really empowering for people. And, Chef AJ, I was thinking about this last night, and I was thinking about our talk and all the things that I wanted to hit on with you. And right now I've been learning French for the past year and a little bit. And it's hard. Like this is the first language I've ever learned apart from English, and it's just hard. And some days I just want to give up. I'm like, oh, I don't want to do my lessons. I don't want to practice. But when I can piece together a sentence, or when I'm like, oh, I know how to conjugate that verb, it's like there's this satisfaction and this joy that I get knowing that I did it. And so I was thinking about that and kind of how it relates to diet and how it relates to weight loss as well. And there's always been, drugs on the market, like Fen. I know that you used to use that.
And it worked. It tricks your brain into feeling full on fewer calories, so I just ate less of the crap.
Right.
And that's kind of what Ozempic does, doesn't it? Or
Right.
gastric bypass. Eat what you want, but now you're eating less. And that will work, but will it make you healthy?
Yeah. And that's what I was kind of hitting on because I was thinking about those drugs, and a lot of people have really been like, okay, this is what I'm doing, it's working. But it also, not only will it make you healthy, probably not, but also it takes away that feeling of doing something healthy for yourself. And so it takes away that feeling of doing something challenging or doing, really changing a part of your life and knowing that you did that. You put in the work, you've changed a habit. And in my opinion, that is something that provides a tremendous amount of joy in your life. And so yes, like you could do that. That is an option, but A, will it be healthy? And B, you're going to miss out on the benefit of, making a delicious cake from using dates, right? So I just kind of wanted to hit on that. I was thinking about that a lot last night.
Nice.
So, okay. Well, you've answered all my questions. I've had an amazing time talking with you. Is there anything, I always like to ask, if somebody stumbles upon this video and is new to this way of eating or just thinking about changing their diet, what would you tell them? What advice would you give them?
The first advice I would give them is to just treat it as an experiment. This is a trick I learned for Dr. Lyle, because if you say to yourself, especially if you're addict, I'm never going to have XYZ again, it's going to fail miserably. So just do a challenge with yourself, or in your group or at some group, where you're just going to commit to 21 days, 30 days of doing something different as best you can. It helps if you have a buddy, I think, if you go in with a friend, because you can support each other. And, I think about it, there's a holiday called Lent that throughout, my life and human history probably, people give something up for Lent. Even if they love drinking and smoking and chocolate or coffee, there are people that have been known, or sex, to give it up for this religious period of Lent. And I always say, if people have been able to do things that were hard for 40 days, could you do it for 20 days or 21, 3 weeks? So treat it as an experiment, because if you say this is forever, and that's, I think, the problem with people that gain it back, is you got to cut yourself some slack. And, and maybe keep a journal. And it could be a food journal, it could be a mood journal, it could be a mood journal, because I would argue that the people that are eating unhealthy right now, that have some type of excess weight that they say they don't want, or a disease that they don't want, how do you really feel? I'm not talking about the unnatural high, but when you really are honest and sit quietly, how do you feel in your body? Does it hurt? Start paying attention. The problem is that addictions make it so that we're not paying attention. The addiction is shutting up the voices that are crying inside you about how much you hurt. And that's what people are afraid of. But get some help. Help is out there, all kinds of help. It is scary, but I'll tell you, sometimes staying the same can be scarier than making a change.
Yeah, long term for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I like that. I like framing it as do it as an experiment. Do it for X amount of days, and just take it from there.
Or one of the other things I would suggest is, people feel like, okay, I'm this, now I got to be this, 100%. No, just because you can't do everything, and you may never be able to do everything, doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything. So what I like to tell people is think about addition rather than subtraction. You know what I'm saying? So like what you did was amazing, quitting smoking and drinking all at the same time, and actually probably changing your diet too. But pick one thing. Can you maybe not cook with salt, but add it at the table? Because right there, you're going to be using less, right? Could you, if you're drinking 10 cups of coffee a day, could you drink 5 regular and 5 decaf? Small steps, when done consistently over time, can lead to big changes. But think about things you can add. Like I always tell people, especially when I don't run my Ultimate Weight Loss program anymore, and one of the tenets was eating vegetables for breakfast, not the only thing. But I said, I don't care if you eat McDonald's all day long. I need you to eat these vegetables first. And guess what would happen? They'd eat them, and it's like, well, I don't want to go to McDonald's now. It's kind of like, because what happens is the vegetables had the thylakoids, which turned off the hunger switch, fought their cravings from sugar, and it's like, God, I just went to all the trouble to do something really healthy. Do I really want to, so that's the thing. Just whatever you decide, just always eat something healthy first. And there's a good chance that you may not eat the unhealthy thing, or might eat less of the unhealthy thing. Big strategy, especially when you're going to other people's houses for dinner or holiday parties, always eat something healthy first.
Great advice. Love it. Very, very sound and practical. Okay, I just have two more quick questions, and then I will let you go on with your day. I know you've been so generous with your time.
Great talking with you.
What's the last thing you ate?
I haven't eaten yet today because this interview was early, but I can tell you what I'm going to have for lunch. We had the ladies' jewelry party yesterday, so there's some leftovers. There's this yummy broccoli salad with grapes, and there's these like little rolls. They're fresh rolls with like, there's no rice in this one, but there's like avocado and cucumber and a rice paper, and that's what I'm going to have. Usually, though, every day it's Hannah yams with broccoli.
That's one of your faves, Hannah yams
I
and broccoli.
love it so much. I never get sick of it.
And is it just the yams and the broccoli steamed? And
Yeah, so I roast the yams
okay,
because if you microwave or steam a potato, it doesn't, at least a sweet potato, it doesn't bring out that
yeah,
sweetness, the caramelization. So I always roast them, and then sometimes I just reheat them in the microwave. But if I have the time, sometimes I'll air fry them because then they end up tasting like marshmallows on toast. And I love them with steamed broccoli. Once in a while, I'll do Brussels sprouts, but I've been eating that for like 10 or 12 years. I just don't seem to. I eat it because I want to. I don't tire of it. And then, unfortunately, my little dog, it's like I can't keep Hannah yams. That's all she wants to eat too. She won't eat the broccoli. She'll eat the Hannah.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so your book comes out again August 20, what day? 7th?
27th, it's a Tuesday, and if anyone would buy the book before August 31st, which is the last day to qualify for New York Times bestseller status, and they save their receipt, and there's a place to email that receipt, I'm offering over $1,000 worth of virtual bonuses, including a recipe video of every single recipe in the book, and my Sweet Indulgence Masterclass, which is about 18 hours, which sold for $497. There's like over 20 hours worth of video. So if you're a visual learner like I am, you'll be able to have a video of every recipe up until August 31st.
That's an awesome deal. So we will link the information in the show notes of this episode, or you can go to cleanfooddirtygirl.com/AJ, and we will make sure that all that information is there so that it gets to you. Well, congratulations on your new book, and thank you for sharing everything that you share with the world, and thank you for sharing a bit of your story with me today and for our community.
Well, thank you, and I have to end with this. Enchanté de faire votre connaissance.
Ah oui, merci.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Au revoir.
De rien.
Ah.